Welcome back to Speech Hybrid. This is your Professor Emily Seal, just getting started on chapters 3, 12, and 13. So chapter 3 is speaking confidently, chapter 12 is wording your speech, and chapter 13 is delivering your speech. So we're kind of going to clump that. A lot of practical advice today. Once again, fairly intuitive, but it's good for us to discuss it and sort of remind you of what I'm looking for when you give a speech for me, as opposed to maybe other public speaking instructors you have experienced in the past, or regular instructors who gave you public speaking assignments and what they were looking for. Everybody has their own sort of criteria for what they think a good speech is, and so getting to know me as your instructor and getting to know what I like and where I'm coming from and what my goals for you are. So the first thing that I want to challenge you to do is create that humorous anecdote, which is your first assignment. This, once again, is usually part of a larger speech. A humorous anecdote is maybe the way that you start your speech. There's a whole comedy season in Washington, D.C. You can see a picture of Barack Obama here, who is excellent at that correspondence dinner when the president is expected to be lighthearted and funny. It's a challenge for a lot of people, especially those who are more serious-minded, but it's just good for the public to see our leaders in their humanity, to see that they have a sense of humor, to see that they are someone we can identify with, that they're a human being. Because humor sort of is a great equalizer, right, and can help bring us together. Another reason why I specifically want you to use humor is that humor can help people remember. Having a sensory experience of laughing can bring to mind. Another thing that it does is it helps when you have a beginning, middle, and end. When a story has a beginning, middle, and an end, it can help you to remember it as well. Chip Heath works at Stanford University, and he wrote this book, Made to Stick. And in his book, he talks about an assignment he gives his Stanford students. He has them give a speech, and then he has them give awards about who they think was the best speaker. And people often choose their own criteria for this, saying, oh, this speaker was well polished and, had great hand gestures and good vocabulary, so we think that she is the best public speaker. And so they'd give that kind of arbitrary award, and then he would show a Monty Python clip to kind of distract them. And after a little time has passed, he asked them to get out a paper and write the name of every person who gave a speech and what they talked about. And here's the really interesting thing that he figured out. People who told anecdotes, people who used stories, those stories were much more memorable than any other sort of content way of presenting. So, for example, statistics. People always think statistics are so important in speeches, but rare, if any, of the statistical data could be remembered, right? We can't always spit those numbers back out. Some of you who are really good with numbers can, but most of us can't spit those numbers back out. But it's the people who told a story that were remembered. A personal anecdote or an example given from real life, those stuck with people. And perhaps the encouraging aspect of this is it wasn't always the most well-polished speaker that was well remembered. Sometimes it was the person where English was the second language and they were really grasping to sort of convey their point. So they chose one of the simpler ways of presenting, which is an anecdote with a story with a beginning, middle, and end. And while it may not have been as eloquent in the moment, it was the most memorable. Isn't this sort of kind of a sad thing to think about, that we could work so hard on a speech and people could forget almost instantly everything that we say? So that's why I encourage both humor and anecdote as a style of presenting, because those fables, those fictional stories or personal stories are going to be well remembered. And we look at world religions, almost all of them have fables or parables that people create or make up or tell real stories in order to convey something deeper. And that mode of storytelling has been part of the oral tradition for thousands of years. And telling those stories with a beginning, middle, and end, a once upon a time, if you will, is a good way to help people remember what you're saying. So that's why I have you start the semester with an anecdote. Humor also draws people in. I have a puzzle piece there because what humor does is it asks you to put two and two together, right? Especially if it's a pun. So if I tell my little nephew, knock knock, who's there? Orange. Orange who? Orange, you glad I didn't say banana. As a little 2-year-old, he is going to laugh and laugh and laugh because he understands and is able to get that orange is a play on word. That's right. This would insult your intelligence if I gave you this joke as a college student because, well, of course you get that joke, right? But as a 2-year-old, he's proud of himself for getting the joke. So if you can solve the puzzle, it sort of can draw you in because there's an element left mysteriously. And if people are smart enough to put two and two together, they can often delight in that. This can happen particularly in jargon surrounding your occupation. So if I came in and, told a plumber joke about wrenches, ha ha ha, all the plumbers kind of laugh at their inside pun about some wrench. And that can bring people together around the fact that they get it. Now, the risk here, if you use humor that is over somebody's head, if you tell a political joke and nobody else in the room is political, then you can maybe alienate your audience because they are not in on the joke. They feel out of the loop. So make sure that you know your audience well enough to assume either their intelligent level or how much they would understand the content or the joke that you're making. So I kind of was complimenting Barack Obama earlier on his humor skills, but it's worth mentioning that he's also very reliant on his teleprompter. He's been accused by many critics of being too reliant on his teleprompter. So this is a little cartoon here of him reading the teleprompter for a good night story. And what I'm going to challenge you to do, because we do not have teleprompters in our classrooms, is I would like you to memorize an outline and then speak extemporaneously. So you have plotted your points, right? First, they get in the canoe. Then the canoe's not moving fast enough. Then my dad has to tie one canoe to the other canoe. Then the child's canoe flips. And so I've memorized the plot points, the major events, and I can remember what comes next, but I'm not going to sit down, write out my speech, stand up there and read my speech. In fact, you will not get an A if you read your speech. I don't care if it's the best written speech, because then your delivery will suffer. Because if you're reading, it's not personal. You can't respond to feedback. You can't react in the moment or be spontaneous, and it's much less likely to be funny if you're reading didactically from a script, unless you're Meryl Streep. If you're Meryl Streep, then you have mastered the whole concept of a script, and you can fool me and I'll never know the difference. But most of you, if you're reading or memorize something word for word, then you are going to come across as fake. Whereas if you memorize the events, memorize the outline, then deliver from your notes, from a note card. Like I said, you can't actually bring a piece of paper up there with you, but you can bring a note card if you want to deliver from your notes and deliver from your PowerPoint. Some of you will have multiple slides, and that will help tell the events of your story. So, humor relaxes your audience. It makes them more open to accepting your message. So if people are in a state of anxiety or frustrated or hungry even, then their body sort of locks up and is not open to receiving information. Of course, this is an entire science around environment and psychological distress and how well people can receive our messages. But we do know that if they laugh and they can relax a little bit, then they're more likely to be receptive to the message you're giving them, which is why Geico, pays so much money in advertising. So that's my charge to you. Just tell me a lighthearted, funny story, something with a beginning, middle, and end. Don't tell me about your entire life story up to now. Don't be vague. Think of a specific event. The time you tripped and cut your knee, the time that you wrecked your car, the time that was your most embarrassing moment. Tell me about that one event. Please don't speak in vague generalities because it's much less interesting. So, all right, so now we're moving into how do we handle the nerves? How do we handle the nerves? And the first thing that I would say to you is to not try to fight the nerves, right? When you start to feel your stomach turn upside down, accept it. Say, okay, stomach's turning upside down. My knees are knocking. I'm short of breath. It is what it is, right? That is your body's reaction to an anxious situation, and it is okay. What happens when you start fighting it and trying to take control of your body is your body will fight back and become even more of a distraction. Except it's normal. The world is not going to end. I'm still going to be able to give my speech even though I may feel a little crazy. I can get up there and do this anyway. Now, the second point I have here about channeling your energy. And what that has to do with is positivity. Don't let that energy go to worrying. Don't let that energy go to some sort of distracting fidget would be bad. If you're sitting and playing with your hair, then that energy is wasted because you fidgeting with your hair is actually a distraction. That extra energy, that extra adrenaline running through your body can be used to have more energy to give your speech. It can be used to create more wit. Right? Use your energy wisely when you have it. And if you need to just kind of burn off some energy, then maybe you need to walk around the room a little bit. Maybe you need to walk around the building before you go in to give your speech. Burn off some of that healthy energy, but don't see it as always a bad thing. Once you get that energy in your body, accept that it could be good energy and don't have that knee-jerk reaction of, oh no, I'm anxious. Accept the energy and go with it. So how do we fight when we get those nerves? What do we do? And I have a picture here of Rick Perry because he was a major contender in the national election until he couldn't remember one of his main points. And almost all of the news sources were surprisingly understanding of him. It happens to everybody. Everybody has these glitches. Everybody forgets and blanks sometimes. But ultimately, he did not make it past the primaries. And I think part of that was because of these speaking errors, the times that he blanked and said, I'm going to change 3 things in the entire America. What were the other 2? Right? So just make sure that you avoid those blank moments by preparing in advance. Don't let the first time you give this speech be in front of the class. You need to practice it for your dog. You need to practice it for the mirror. You need to practice it for your steering wheel. You need to practice it for the shower head. And then you need to practice it in front of another human being before you get to us. If the first time that you open your mouth in front of an audience is when you're making up these words, you have every right to be worried. And that is unethical. Like I said, you're wasting our time when you get up there and just ramble off the top of your head. So practice your speech. Go over it and over and over it until it becomes muscle memory. Practice it out loud. Don't just practice it in your head. You may sound a little crazy to your roommate, but better that than be even more nervous the first day. At some point, after you kind of rehearsed the order of things and got some of the wording worked out, you do need to practice on your feet and practice your hand gestures. Because one of the first things that some of you will come to me and say is, what do I do with my hands, right? It can be sort of disorienting. Well, there's a couple of things that you can do. You can put your hands in your pocket. You can fold your hands in front of your belly button, right? In front of your waist. That's usually not an off-putting place to put your hands. Some ways not to hold your hands. Don't hold your hands behind your back because then you can seem sort of militaristic and distancing. Don't cross your arms in front of you because that can kind of close off your audience. So think about either holding your hands up around your belly button height or keeping them in your pocket, or holding them simply beside your sides, just in a normal standing position. Some of you are overly expressive with your hands, right? You're fidgety, you're waving them all around, and you're sawing the air, to quote Hamlet. Try not to be overly gesturing, which can come with not preparing enough. So as you prepare and watch this, somebody else watches you, naturalistic gestures or something to strive for. Right? Once again, to another human being. Know your content, right? Know your story backwards and forwards. Know who you're talking about and what you're talking about. And that's one of the novelties of this class, is that you can pick things that you care about and that you know, right? If you're a football expert, then you can talk about football. If you really know your cupcakes, tell us about cupcakes. Focus in on what you already know and already care about. Don't try to fake being an expert at something you're not. So think positive, okay? So when you start to feel that stomach turn, or your knees feel weak, or a sense of itchiness or readiness, then that really is a time for you to start envisioning yourself doing well. Imagine yourself walking up to the front of the room. Imagine other people congratulating you after your speech on a great job. Imagine yourself nailing those punchlines. Think positive thoughts. What might be your knee-jerk reaction is to think negative thoughts. What happens if I fall down as I'm walking to the front of the stage? What happens if I can't pull up my PowerPoint? What happens if I have a booger hanging out my nose? And these are some of the natural worries. This is your body in that fight or flight mode, trying to prepare itself for the worst. But what I'm going to tell you is, don't focus on the worst. Don't let your mind go there. Discipline your mind. Think positive. If you believe in a higher power, then say those prayers, say those affirmations to yourself. Talk to the higher power about it, rather than letting your mind run away in the negative. If you need to do some meditation, if you're a runner and you need to do your run that morning, make sure that you're mentally at your best and ready to discipline your mind. So now we're getting into isometric exercises. These are helpful, I think. As an actress, I did a lot of them. Isometric exercises can help you relieve body tension, right? Take a deep breath in, 2, 3, 4, and out. Take a deep breath in and out. And what they can do for your body is send oxygen to relax you, right? A lot of us, when we get nervous, we start breathing more shallowly, and we don't get all of that oxygen that we need. Another isometric exercise that you can do here is just skin-to-skin contact. I know it may sound a little silly, and you may feel a little silly doing it, but pet your arm. Right? Pet your hand. This is not something we're going to do during our speech. These isometric are beforehand. But that skin-to-skin contact can help relax you. For some of you, it's your hair, right? Running your fingers through your hair, scratching your scalp real good. That will get your blood flowing and sort of relax you, right? This isn't the day that we want to wear clothes that are too tight that might cause you anxiety, or wear your hair some slightly uncomfortable way for some of you ladies who like to do it up big. This is the time to, as much as you can, have your body release that tension, right? So another exercise we can do in the isometric vein is to clench your fists. Clench them as tightly as you can. You can feel, for those, some of you have long nails, this might not work, but if you can clench your fists tight, now release your fists. You can feel the blood sort of flowing back through your fingers. Now if you can think about your shoulders and pull your shoulders up around your ears like Uncle Fester, and you can feel the blood sort of rushing into your shoulders, right? And hold that tension there for a good 10 seconds. Now release those shoulders, and you can feel the blood flowing back into your shoulders. That's a really natural body tension thing that happens, kind of lifting your shoulders, that Uncle Fester look. A lot of us hold a lot of anxiety in our shoulders or maybe in our jaw, and so that's a way to sort of intentionally stretch and loosen and get some blood flowing into those areas. And I mentioned stretching, yoga for some of you who do yoga, or just simple stretches like you used to do in gym class. Reach down and touch your toes. That kind of stretching can redirect that energy in your body towards a more healthy state of mind. So here's some things to tell yourself. So what? Right? What is the worst that can happen? You get up and you make a fool of yourself. Congratulations. Lots of people are going to make their fool of themselves at some point in the semester. It's not the end of the world. So what if this doesn't happen exactly the way that I want it to? Some of you are perfectionists and you need to let go, right? If it doesn't go perfectly as planned, it's okay. It's going to be okay. As we go through these mental blocks, another thing you might happen is you can just tell yourself, I've rehearsed it. I've practiced it. I practiced it for the shower head. I practiced it for the steering wheel. I practiced it for my friend. I practiced it for my dog. I've done it. I've got it. I've got it down. I can do this again. And this is why a lot of you had so much practice playing basketball. You know, you've shot that basketball through the hoop from the three-point line 50 times so that when you come to do it in rehearsal, it's into the muscle memory. And muscle memory is really a phenomenal thing. The fact that your body can remember driving directions, right? Some of you who've been coming to Motlow for a while now, you don't even have to stop and think, which way should I turn to get to Motlow? Your body has done it so many times that it gets into a routine and it uses what's called muscle memory. It remembers which way to turn. Maybe you're a little bit daydreaming. You get to school and you say, wow, I didn't even have to think that whole time. And part of that is your body's own ability to remember the moves, right? Some of you who are dancers are well aware of this. You practice a dance enough, you're up there, you don't even know that your body's moving. You just get into muscle memory mode and your body remembers what comes next. It's really a mystery that we need to learn more about, those of you who are going into the medical field. Go figure it out and come back to me. Another thing to kind of think about if you get nervous in front of an audience is to remind yourself that the people in the room are on your side, right? They want you to do well. We are here to support you. We're not going to go away and gossip. Oh my goodness, you're not going to believe how bad his public speech was this morning. Oh my goodness, right? We have the same anxieties. We have the same fears. We are all flawed human beings and accept the flaws in you. So don't worry about what we think, because we're honestly more concerned about our own speeches than we are your speech. So that's kind of part of the mentality of think of everybody as naked. Some of you might be intimidated if you're performing in front of the president or you're performing in front of, your high school crush, but hopefully your high school crush is not in this class. So just think of us all as your fellow comrades and people who want you to do well. This may sound bad, but for some of you, your biggest solace will just be, it's going to be over soon. Let me give this speech, it's going to be over, and then I can go home and get back to whatever it is I want to do. That's one perspective that can kind of help you get over your anxiety about a speech. And perhaps my favorite is to let go of that perfectionism. Some of you are so concerned with stumbling over a word or forgetting, pausing for just a minute. And I'm saying, I don't need perfect public speeches. I need honest public speeches. I need well-rehearsed public speeches. I need scholastically challenging public speeches, but I don't need perfection. And that's never what I've asked of you. You are a student. You are in the learning process, and you are going to have room to grow, and that is okay. Let go of your idea of perfection. This is only part of my grade. Some of you who are really super achievement driven and feel like you have to ace every single speech, you can make a B on a speech and still make an A in the class. So just sort of let go of the idea that you have to be perfect at every single point. You'll have your better speeches and you'll have your worst speeches. Everybody will. Another way to make sure that you're going to give a confident speech is to believe in your topic. Find the right topic for you. try not to focus on yourself. Focus on your message, right? We're talking about something important to you. Maybe you're discussing your tribute speech and you're paying tribute to Mother Teresa and how she has been selfless and she's served in Calcutta and she was a strong-minded woman who spoke the truth in love. And so that's a really important message for you. And so maybe you want to focus on getting that message to people. Don't focus on, do I have something in my teeth? Don't focus on how you're saying it. Focus on the message, because often that message is what we're trying to comprehend. Make sure that we're getting your message rather than thinking that we're evaluating you as a public speaker. If you were trying to teach us how to make a cake, right, then you're going to stay on task. Think about what comes next. Give us the order of things. Don't get distracted, like I said, thinking about your insecurities. Watch their faces. Remember, we're talking about the importance of feedback. Are they following you? Are they with you? Are they tired? Are they confused? Slow down and really respond to them. And if you need to change your message or change your examples in order to make sure you're interacting with your audience. Above all, guard that sense of conversation with your audience and making sure they understand you. This is one of my favorite Dave Grohl quotes. It's not about being perfect. It's not about sounding absolutely correct. It's not about what goes into the computer. It's about what goes on in your heart, what goes on in your head. And he was receiving, when he quoted this, he was receiving an Emmy for one of his songs, and it was not digitally mastered. I love Beyonce, but a lot of her song is very mastered and digitally, altered and stuff. And what he's saying is, it doesn't always have to be polished. That raw, in your garage kind of sound can be really powerful too. And if it has a glitch here and there or a mistake, then that makes it human. It doesn't necessarily make it unworthy of our attention. Avoid writing out your speech word for word, because then it sounds like you're reading it, right? Even if you memorize it, it sounds like you're reading. And then you're going to not have that eye contact you need to have with us as an audience. So make sure you've gone through the speech enough not to refer to your notes too much or your PowerPoint too much. So this is perhaps one of the greatest critical thinking skills that you'll have the challenge of utilizing, and that is focusing in on the relevant information, right? You want to tell us about the day you spent at Disneyland. Well, if you go minute by minute, okay, at 8 o'clock we arrived, at 8:05 we went to the bathroom, at 8:10 we got in line, right? We don't need an exhaustive story. We need a key point. So you want to ask yourself, what are the events of this story? What's going on? Okay, first you need to set up for us, who are the characters of the story? Is it your sister? Is it your best friend? Introduce us to them. Where are we? What's the setting, right? Maybe you have a picture of a park to illustrate to us that you were walking beside the lake. Then you want to ask, what is the inciting incident? What kind of brought about the impotence to the story? So if it is a guy, right, then how did you meet? How did he ask you out? Then we get into the climax of the story, and then he kissed me, right? That would be a climax to a story. And you would want to focus on those events and telling those events one at a time and letting those events unfold. Remember, we talked about in the humorous anecdote, don't start with the end. Let me tell you a story about a guy who kissed me. Well, you've just told us the end of the story. We want to turn around slowly. We want to unfold those events as to build suspense. So, narrow your content, focus in on the events of those stories, memorize the series of events, and then fill us in on your way in however you can relate to the audience. Wording your speech. One of the first things to kind of take a look at is the denotation of your words, the dictionary definition. Some of you may accidentally create some malapropisms. You may think that that's what the word means, but that's not what the word means. So make sure before you use a word, and I want to encourage you to use, college level vocabulary. Don't just use 3-letter words. We want to use a college level vocabulary, but make sure you know what the words means before you use it. Then the connotation is what we talked about a lot last class, which was the emotional association with words. In chapter 1, remember, he said the American jihad, and jihad in America really has an association of terrorism. So the Harvard professors asked him to change the name of his speech. What emotional associations do we have with any given word? And we want to avoid those words with negative social emotional connotations. Sorry. Jargon. This is super important, and you'll hear me say this over and over again. Never use a word that you don't think your audience understands. But when you do need to use that word, tell us first. Never assume that we have a certain amount of knowledge, especially about your activities, hobbies, or business. Okay? If you are a plumber and you tell a plumbing joke about wrenches, I don't know anything about plumbing. I'm not going to laugh. You've got to bring in that wrench and show me and explain to me that jargon before I can be in on the joke. Even the worst is acronyms, right? And then I went to SETC, and then after that I went to KCACTF, and we are BFF, LOL. Don't assume that we know what those mean. Take a minute to define every important term in your speech. In fact, that's how a lot of you should begin your speech, is by defining the term. Define the setting, define the character, define if you're telling a story that happened at work, define, what that kind of truck is that you were trying to repair. Don't assume that we know what the AK-47 is a gun. All right, always, if you're going to use those terms that are not necessarily in the dictionary, you need to explain them in the encyclopedia way, right? Anything that isn't dictionary knowledge, if it's encyclopedia knowledge, you need to go give us that encyclopedia definition in your own words. Cliches. So you are not allowed to talk about why people should stop smoking in my class, because every argument we've heard over and over again about why people should stop smoking, it's a cliche argument, unfortunately. And even though it's true, things can be cliche and true, it still is played out, as my hipster friend would say. That's played out. And I tell him I like a song. Oh, that song is played out. Well, I don't care. But anyway, you don't want to use those cliches. You don't want to just say what everybody else is saying. If you're telling us something that we probably already know, then you're not really speaking. You're just stating the obvious. Let me give you an example of this. So, I had a student give a speech on the evolution of technology. He showed a telegraph, then he showed a telephone with a rotary dial on there, and then he brought out a cell phone. And then he brought out an earpiece. Said, "This is Bluetooth." Well, most people already knew that there was a telegraph, and then a telephone, and then a cell phone, and then an earpiece. Like, most people understand that. So everything that he said was cliche. Everything that he was explaining was common knowledge and easily understood. So it sort of insults our intelligence when you give a speech like that. I had another student give an awesome speech about the technology of cell phones and how it's evolved over the years, and who came up with what, and how much was created by Apple, and then what were the other contributors to the cell phone. And that was not a cliche speech. Most people didn't understand that, and he had done his research, and that was interesting, right? Cute as a button, dead as a doornail, between a rock and a hard place. Just avoid those cliche phrases, but then even more avoid those cliche understandings. I actually have 213, but that's on page 210. Sorry there. All right, use your vocabulary. Break out those descriptive words that are meaningful. Be careful of filler words. Now, some of you have, maybe Asperger's or some sort of behavioral syndrome, and you cannot help using your filler words. And if you have Asperger's, please let me know, and I will make sure to not penalize you for using those filler words, because that's part of your syndrome and your condition. But for most of us, a few ums and ers is not a big deal. I mean, obviously, I've been saying in my lectures, so I'm not going to be really hard on you about filler words, but you do want to be careful. They are distracting, especially if you use the same words over and over again. Like, I don't know, it can be very grating to our nerves. So just be careful. And if I tell you that you have a filler word, next speech, just try to be careful about not using that word. But I would rather you use the filler word than be focused on not saying the filler word. It's kind of a tricky tick to get over. And the best thing is just to have practiced your speech so much that you don't have dead time that you feel like you need to fill in with, right? Just be fluid enough in your conversation that you don't need those filler words. Find colorful expressions, right? Not vulgar or cuss words or anything, but, find cute turns of phrase. Find playful ways of explaining things. Especially here in the South, we have some really fun explanations, and it can really bring a lot of delight to your audience to find the right way to say something, or the fun way to say something, or describe something. Okay, I'm going to ask that only 20% of your speech be quoted material. Now, why do I bother to say that? Especially when you research. I'll have some people come in and quote me to death. Well, this is what somebody says about my topic, and this is what somebody else says about my topic, and this is what somebody else says about my topic. Well, yes, 20% of your speech could be quotes. You could maybe give me 10 quotes, but when you start getting into the 20 and 30 quotes, you're quoting me to death. It needs to be your own words. You need to tell me what you think about the topic. I've asked you your opinion. Now, your opinion should be based on scholarship. It should be based on your research. But you don't want to just stand and quote to me, this is what he said, and this is what she said, and this is what he said. I want to know in your own words what they said. So, otherwise it borderlines on plagiarism. All right, I gave you the wrong page number again. I am so sorry. This says page 215, but we're actually back on page 212. Page 212. So he goes through the different senses, right? Eyes, ears, mouth, nose, these different senses that we have, and how you can appeal to those senses. And I often call it the roller coaster quotient, right? Can you imagine the wind in your hair? Imagine sitting on the beach and the sun is beating on your skin. Imagine how good that salad tastes. Imagine the smell of cooking cookies, right? And when you create that sort of getting our bodies involved and our sensorial, tactile experience, you reach us on a deeper level. And it often is a great way to introduce a speech, is to think about that sensory experience. So maybe you're talking about going to the fair, and you might say, remember what it's like to get cotton candy at the fair? Do you remember how it sticks to your nose? And that kind of sensory experience, and you get our imagination involved. You participate with our entire bodies rather than just our mind, and it can often open us up to a greater discussion. So we talked about this a little bit in our in our second chapter when we talked about ethics, but it really is important to reiterate. Avoid stereotyping. Please don't assume that the only people who have problems with gun control are African American males, 19 to 26. I'm not saying there aren't any African American males who are performing drive-bys in Chicago, but there are also kids having hunting accidents here in Tennessee, right? So gun control is a problem from every culture, not just one culture. And so we want to avoid picking on any one culture. Another example of this might be if you're going to talk about abortion, right? You need to talk about men's responsibility and in the birthing process, not just speak to women, which has been something highly criticized in political realms recently. We want to avoid using words that have the harsh tinge to them, right? So if we call someone, once again, the dreaded word, retarded, right? We want to avoid that word altogether. We might say a handicapped person or an able bodied. There are lots of ways to kind of soften your language and make sure that your rhetoric is saying person first and not that she's a Jew, but that she's a Jewish person, not that she's black, but she's an African American female. Those sort of person first just reminds us as a collective that we're talking about a human being and not just the person as a stereotype or as a piece of scientific data or as a test subject. This is a human being we're discussing, and we want to keep that into the public mind. And then the last one, concede, is a little bit PC, but it's worth mentioning. Don't always use examples of, white men because they have always been included. The rest of us have been excluded for long amounts of times. So if you find a picture that has women in it rather than men, if you find a picture that has minority people in it, then we need to represent all people, not just people like you. And I say this, if your default is only to do pictures of people in your minority, then think about including pictures from other minorities. Because this just helps everyone to feel included. And it has to do with what are called unwritten rules, what people perceive as reality rather than what is actual reality. So, for example, if a child is never talked to about racial discrimination and they go into a school system where only people in authority are white men and the only people of a minority are the janitors, then the child is going to presume by default that white men are powerful and that people of minority are not. And so we have to be intentional about including pictures of people who are successful in minorities to reverse that message for children and say, no, there are white men who are janitors and there are black women who are doctors. So we just need to kind of help people understand that all people have the right to achieve and all human beings can be involved in multiple level, right? Women can play football and men can be nurses. And, this is the society that we live in. It has a sense of inclusion. So that is our ethic in this class, is inclusion and tolerance, and I am going to continue to encourage you to use generic language and be inclusive in your representation of human beings. So I have George W. Bush. I mean, he's so easy to pick on, isn't he? Because he was often criticized for his use of language and creating words or, making up words that weren't actual words. So people will judge you. That's just the truth of it. People will judge you according to how eloquent you are. Try to avoid, like we said, those malapropisms. Try not to, before you use a word, make sure you know what that word means. Always be careful about verb tense, right? This is a common problem that I get in my classes, students using verb tense incorrectly, or also using the personal pronouns incorrectly. That's another one that people mess up a lot. When you answer the phone in a professional situation, you need to say this is he or this is she. Make sure that you have the correct phrasing as far as using your pronouns are. And then, for example, I didn't say, when you're talking about verb tense, make sure that you tell your entire story in past tense. Try not to jump back and forth between, and now we're at, we're on the roller coaster. Well, you should say we were on the roller coaster. Don't jump back and forth between your verb tense. And some of your English teachers may have asked you to always write in the present tense. Well, that is different than from what speech is. Speech, you need not to suppose the present tense. So for pluralization, some people may add S's where they are unnecessary. I'm thinking of, LOL cats, I can has cheeseburger, can I have a cheeseburger, right? Not cheeseburgers, or I gots to go, right? Some of the silly languages some of us use, but some of us accidentally use pluralization when it's unnecessary. Don't add an S to things just because, to be fun or playful. We need to use correct grammar. We need to use language correctly in order for people to respect us. Jargon, which I already stated, just make sure that if you say a word that's not readily in the dictionary, that you give us a short definition in your own words of what that means. So this is my Uncle Paul. He's a lawyer for the NRA, a defense lawyer. You can see he's got that hair lip, and he will just play his southern accent like a fiddle. And he will tell you all about, leaping possums and golly gee darn. And he's got this kind of southern charm to him. And he's very successful, and he goes all over the world, London and New York City, and presents these cases with his southern charm. But he uses correct grammar. This is my friend Rebecca. She is one of the most talented sewers you would not believe. She can just pick up some fabric and make a suit, like a men's suit. She can drape a suit. This woman has some mad skills. But she also has some grammar problems in the way that she speaks. My friend Rebecca, she sounds very country, and even when she was writing papers, she had a lot of trouble trying to sort of figure out which words were supposed to be pluralized and which verb tense she was supposed to use, and she would make those mistakes often in conversation. And when she decided to work in a university, she had some trouble getting hired for the first couple years. And, right or wrong, I can't help but believe part of that was due in part to her lack of ability to use grammar well. And some people thinking, maybe wrongly, that just because she has a southern accent, she may not be as polished or eloquent of a speaker. And so there was some prejudice against her. But now that she's got a job, she's wonderful at doing her job. She is fantastic at her job. And some people may initially judge her for some of the grammar mistakes that she makes. But that doesn't mean that she's not still an awesome sewer. Here is a jerk, Henry Higgins. If you ever read My Fair Lady, it's actually based on a book by George Bernard Shaw called Pygmalion. And the man in this situation, he picks up a flower girl and teaches her how to speak correctly. When he teaches her correct grammar and pronunciation, then passes her off as somebody wealthy. Now, the reason I tell you this story is because the same is true here in Tennessee, right? Rich people sometimes affect their voice. We have that rich southern accent. Oh, let's go down to Georgia and we elongate our A's and vowel sounds, right? Whereas a lower class accent, right, which is what most people in my county have. Hey, how y'all doing? You doing all right? Right, and we have that lower class. Well, the same is true here in Britain. We have that Cockney oh kind of accent as opposed to the Julie Andrews accent where you're speaking very British, right, and very correctly. Well, there are Henry Higgins in the world, and I just want to let you know there are people who will judge you based on the way that you speak. And if you speak southern and country and hey y'all, how you doing, then that's a perfectly legitimate way for you to talk when you're at home. But if you speak that way at work, some people will judge you. And I'm not endorsing that. I think that the Henry Higgins of this world should be shot. They are jerks. In the original Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw, when he proposes love to her, she says, no, of course I won't marry you. You judged me and who I was as a human being based on the way that I talked, and that's unfair. But those people are in the world, and I just want to let you know that. To what extent do you think that money equals class? And I would say, for discussion question A there, that most of us can agree that there are some people with money in their pockets who are not classy, right? There are people who can say things in their very sweet and wealthy way and still insult you, right? And still be unclassy. But there is also, if we look at discussion number B there, if you are hiring someone and someone speaks eloquently and somebody else is mumbly and very, very has a strong accent, then sometimes you might go for the person more polished, right or wrong. Not making a moral statement there, we're just stating the obvious. Another problem that I encounter quite a bit in this class is someone too quiet. So if you were talking to a student who was too quiet, what kind of challenges might you give them? What I find most often is that it's a psychological battle, right? Someone saying, talk to the back of the class, or speak up, or be more confident. These are the kind of advice that most of you will give someone who's being too quiet, and that's true, that often it's a psychological battle rather than a physiological. Most of you have the ability to create the sound in your throat. I often think of Whoopi Goldberg in Sister Act when she gets the little redheaded girl to sing to the back of the auditorium. So here are some questions we talk about. This is the way we can kind of converse. First of all, you want to make sure that you're not talking too fast. Ladies, we have a tendency to talk faster than men. You may need to slow down, especially when you're nervous. You might just talk faster. If you're also looking at the dialect aspect, people in the South tend to speak slower than people in the North, or even in the West. So if you ask yourself, am I talking too fast? Well, you're talking to a room full of Southerners. And if you're originally from, upper New York State, then you may be talking too fast for us. We may need you to slow down a little bit just because we're used to talking a little slower. Pitch. Right? Pitch has a lot to do with how pleasant and enjoyable your voice is. For some of you men who have James Earl Jones type voices, you need to make sure you're not muttering. You need to focus on those end consonants, right? And James Earl Jones is the best at this. He says Simba, and he hits all of those T's very crisply, and it's almost as if he's over articulating, but he knows that about his pitch. He's talking down here, and those consonants are more likely to be muddied or mumbled if he's talking at a lower pitch. And not to gender stereotype here, because I got a low voice for a woman. The other, if you speak in a high pitch, right? Hi, my name is Kaylee. You want to be careful that you're talking loud enough. Tends to be that if you have a higher voice, you're going to speak more softly. So just make sure that you're speaking loud enough for all of us to hear you. And also make sure that you're speaking with your natural voice. What can happen to us sometimes when we're nervous is we can get a little fake. Hi, welcome to Starbucks. Can I get you anything? Right? And that sort of put on gentility is not truly how the person would honestly react to you, right? Hi, welcome to Starbucks, right? If you have a more natural, laid back, honest voice, sometimes girls, when we get nervous, we squeak, we go higher, we up our register, and we need to keep it honest and in our natural voice as much as possible. If you have a choice, girls, in talking a little bit higher or a little bit lower, and this is controversial to say, but I'll say it anyway, sometimes if you speak with a little bit lower pitch, then you can come across as more authoritative. So if you go to someone, you say, why don't you ever treat me like an adult, and you're whining, right? Then you can come across as childlike. Whereas if you use your deeper, more resonant, more demanding voice, right, and you actually speak honestly to them, then your needs will be more readily met with understanding. Whereas if you're whining and you have this tone and a high pitch, then you can come across as girly and someone that's not going to be taken seriously. Right? And I'm laughing because I'm a loud talker. You probably have your volume down all the way because I'm a Southern girl. So Southern people tend to talk a little bit louder than everybody else. Some of us, when there's some truth to the Will Ferrellism about I can't control the volume of my voice, when he does that pitch in Anchorman, because there are some of us who, when we get nervous, we do what's called pushing. We talk louder than we need to talk, and I am guilty as charged. Some of you, of course, speak more quietly than you need to. So we call this vocal variation because there should be times when you're talking more softly, and there should be times when you're talking louder, and there should be times when you use all of your pitches in your voice, and there's other times you're going to talk low, right? Sometimes you'll talk a little bit faster if you're just going through an example, but when you're stressing a main point, you need to talk slower. Right, so just keep in mind that variation is something you should strive for. Some of you have been told before that you have monotone voices, right? And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So here are some things to think about. I'm not trying to change you. Go home, talk slang to your buddies, talk slang to your family. But when you're speaking in my class, I want you to use scholastic conversation. This is not just something that I'm making up. Universities, worldwide require a certain amount of professionalism. Think of yourself as a news anchor. Think of yourself as the weather girl, right? You need to have that level of professionalism. Don't go overboard on your professionalism, right? You don't want to talk to us like we're in a boardroom. That level of distancing and standing behind the podium is too much. But then also, hey girl, how you doing? Well, I'm not your girl, right? I don't know you like that. Do not pretend like you're overly familiar with us. But you also don't need to say thereto, forthwith, more to the point, right? Those sort of formal lawyer language is only going to distance you from us. Please don't use colloquialisms. She got it a stow, right? Y'all ain't. These are too informal, and we need to stay scholastically correct. Please don't have typos on your handouts or media. Spell check. Make sure that you read them over a couple times and have someone else double check them for you to make sure that you don't have any typos. Pronunciation. Make sure you're saying the word correctly as we say it in America. If you are, from a foreign country, for example, if you're from India and you say the British pronunciation, well, I can get behind that because you learned British English. But if you're just American and you've only heard a British person talk about that and you say Oedipus instead of Oedipus, well, it's Oedipus in the US, and that is the English pronunciation is Oedipus. The British pronunciation is Oedipus. Make sure that you say it the way we say it here in America. And I have a pronunciation dictionary if you have any questions. You can also Google it. There's usually pretty reputable pronunciation guides online that will click the little speaker button and they'll read it out for you. But you want to sound like you know what you're talking about. No one wants to go to a doctor who mispronounces, their medication. It has to do with us believing that you are credible as talk on the topic. And you need to at least have studied enough that you know how to say the words. If you don't know how to say the words, then you haven't studied enough. You haven't digested it and put it in your own words. So resonant quality. Resonance is not only discussing your volume level, it's also discussing that the hum in your voice. If you would take your fingertips and put them on your cheekbones and then hum a little, you can feel those bones. You can feel those bones vibrating. Right? And that's because your body is just like a cello, right? A little tiny violin, when those reverberations bounce around in there, it makes a little tiny noise, but we have a big, huge cello, right? That frame creates a deeper noise, which is why it's so funny when a big guy is like, hi, I'm tiny and I have a squeaky voice, because traditionally, the larger your frame is, right, the insides of your body affect the resonance of your voice. So we want to make sure that we have a full-bodied sound, as much as we can interpret and channel James Earl Jones and those nice, rich, full tones, the better. Having a resonant voice is rich in tone. Dulcet, right? We want to have high tones. We want to have a musical quality, not just that we're saying, hi, I'm happy to be here, this is public speaking, right? If you're talking monotone, it usually has more to do with your attitude than what's coming out of your mouth. But if you really have a genuine problem with monotone, practice happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Miss Seal. Happy birthday to you. When you practice those pitches, speaking with the amount of pitch that you have in your vocal expression. Always know your pronunciation. Be clear, right? Don't give us don't have that mush mouth. We don't want to sound like, King of the Hill. We don't want to have we can't understand what you're saying. No, right? We want to have clear speech. And articulate those end consonants. Articulation is the mechanical process of speech. So for some of you who maybe have a heavy tongue, right, or you have a hearing problem, you actually have trouble physiologically creating that sound, right? If you have a lisp, that's why when your two front teeth are missing, right, you have a lisp because there's something wrong with your physical body that is a barrier for you in creating sound. Pronunciation, on the other hand, is emphasizing certain syllables. The same is true of Topher Grace, right? The thing that's kind of clever about that is most people emphasize Christopher because Topher are both unstressed syllables. Christopher, if we call him Chris, right, that makes sense because the downbeat, the emphasis is on Chris. People don't say Christopher, right? We want to focus on pronouncing each syllable and where to put the emphasis in that syllable. What syllable to emphasize. Monotone, right? Only one pitch. We don't want to be too sing-songy and get into listing things and using redundant speech patterns. This can happen particularly when we're reading or we're over-rehearsed. We get into the sing-songy pattern that's sort of redundant and doesn't feel natural. Remember, the goal is always to have conversational natural tone. There's some of your articulators, right? Your teeth, the lips, the teeth, the tip of the tongue, the tip of the tongue, the teeth, the lips. We have the uvula, that little dangly thing. We have the tongue, and if anything, if you have a snotty nose, if you have a sore throat, all of these things are going to affect the way that you speak. So you need to drink a lot of water and protect your articulators. Okay, so I just want you to try this, and of course I can't make you, but pause it for a second. The lips, the teeth, the tip of the tongue, the tip of the tongue, the teeth, the lips. Focus on that pa, 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 ta, 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 th, right? Make sure those end consonants, particularly for some of you who are real Southern and you're used to going to the store and we're going to go hunting and fishing, right? And you're not focusing on the g, hunting and fishing, right? The lips, the teeth, the tip of the tongue, the tip of the tongue, the teeth, the lips. Focus on those end consonants. A rubber baby buggy bumper, right? Just to get those articulators going. And then some of you, it's nervous or anxiousness that you need to make sure you're saying the words correctly. All I want is a proper cup of coffee made in a proper copper coffee pot. So if you can remember the word order, what happens to some of us when we get anxious is we have trouble reading and we can get our words jumbled up or get in too much of a hurry and try to say something before it comes out right. So just slow down and say, all I want is a proper cup of coffee made in a proper coffee pot. So take just a minute if you would and say each one of those 3 times fast. Practice these tongue twisters if you have problems articulating and enunciating. And your tongue is just like any other muscle in your body. The more you use it, the better it gets. So, focus on articulating well, and then that practice will hopefully pay off. So right before you get up to have a speech, maybe you want to say the lips, the teeth, the tip of the tongue, the tip of the tongue, the teeth, the lips, to make sure you're focusing on that articulation. Particularly if that's a note I give you over and over again, do those tongue twisters, do your exercises so that when you get up to speak, we can understand you. Expressing with your body. Oh, Charlie Chaplin, you're so good at expressing with your body. I'm jealous at how good he is at expressing with his body. Posture, right? Some of you are going to communicate to us that you are not confident and you're uncomfortable just through the way that you stand. So some of you think of posture as something militaristic, standing up super straight and locking your knees and leaning back. Well, I have bad news for you. If you lock your knees and you lean back, you're going to pass out. Posture is something much more akin to alignment. Think about your ears being above your shoulders. I particularly am a chin thruster. I tend to sit with my chin too far forward. I focus on putting those ears back between your shoulders. Put your shoulders stacked above your hips and your hips over the middle of your feet. Right? Don't lean too far on your toes. Don't lean back on your heels. But think about standing up, stacking one on top of the other, nice and tall. Facial expressions. Most of you are pretty good at having natural facial expressions. If you are, tend to be sort of mask-faced and don't use your eyes much, or you don't have a lot of facial expressions, then you might want to just think about involving your eyebrows in the conversation somehow. You know, a lot of expressiveness comes through the eyes. So keep your eyes up, make lots of eye contact, and that will help us to read your expressions more clearly. Gestures. So this is basically how you use your hands and feet. We don't want to rock back and forth. We don't want to scratch our nose for the entire speech. We don't want to play with our hair for the entire speech. Keep your gestures minimal and as much as possible not distracting. And this is really a difficult task for some of you. And it's not until I record your speech that you'll say, oh yeah, I am rocking back and forth. The best thing that I can tell you is, once again, just to hold your hands at your belly button height, or keep them in your pocket, or keep them by your side, and try not to overthink it. The more naturalistically they can come across. My least favorite gesture is what I call holding up grapefruits, palms to the sky, just kind of sawing your hands around. Sorry, that was my poodle. Sawing your hands around. He got excited when I was doing these gestures for myself. Then that can be distracting. Movement, right? I'm going to challenge you only to move when you change thoughts. So if you're talking about Disneyland and you say, okay, at the beginning of the day, right, and then you maybe take 3 steps forwards and say, by the time we got to Epcot, then you take 2 or 3 steps forwards, and then my entire outfit got soaking wet. The end. So you kind of move your body in the room according to your transitions of thought, and that helps us organize your ideas. Otherwise, try to avoid pacing back and forth up in front of everybody. That's very distracting. Usually for most of our speeches, you can stand in one spot and it'll be fine. Once again, keep that eye contact. Some people will tell you to work from the left side of the room to the right side of the room, from the front of the room to the back of the room. And I would just say try to make eye contact with as many people as you can. I think that any other way can kind of seem forced. If you're showing favoritism, don't keep eye contact with just your favorite person in the room for the entire speech. And then if there's someone who you need to avoid, maybe somebody makes you nervous for one reason or another, you need to avoid looking at them at all costs. Just don't look at them. Why podium's the devil? Okay, don't get up there and stand behind a piece of machinery, because it is going to be distracting and distancing from your audience. It tends to give the message that I'm up here and you're down there, I'm behind the podium and you're out there. Really what you want to do more often is keep yourself close to the audience, change your positions, keep your note card in your hand so that you can refer to it quickly, and not just stand behind the podium the entire time. Because first of all, it'll keep you in place. Also, if you put your notes on the podium, then you're going to be looking down rather than looking at your audience. It's just unengaging and boring for a lot of us. No gum. Don't do it. Never. Don't get up there with food in your mouth. It's gross. Try not to wear anything more interesting than you are. No big bangly earrings. No really serious cleavage. We don't want anything that is going to distract from your message. No multiple papers. Remember, you need to have just a note card that you're delivering from, if anything. Most of you will be able to just focus on your PowerPoint presentation. Use your body. So I've talked about all the ways you should not use your body, but I also have not mentioned that there are ways that you can utilize your body to include the audience. Once again, Cannot stress it enough. Eye contact. Don't turn your back to the audience to look at your slide, or for any reason them looking at the back of your head or your butt, even worse, is not interesting and engaging. Sends a very bad message to them. Watch distracting ticks. You know, if you like to play with your hair, maybe you put your hair back so that just avoids the temptation to gesture. Right? Once again, we want to move on the transitions. We want to take 2 steps to the left after we have finished our intro paragraph and we're moving into our first sort of idea. So for this 2-minute speech, maybe you just don't ever move. That's fine. Once again, we talked about proximity in that lecture number 1. When people start to tune out, maybe you stand closer to them. Alright, so that's all I've got. If you will, take a moment to read over chapters 3, 12, and 13. After you've read over those, go take our quiz there and do well. I will see you in class. Thank you for listening.